Hey guys, the Superhero Bibliophiles episode you're about to listen to was originally part of the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club, an exclusive Patreon subscriber show I used to run a few years back. So if you're confused by out-of-date references or comments about the Patreon show, that's why. Now, enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. I am your host, Perry Constantine, and this is an exclusive show only available to the Patreon subscribers where we talk about comics and graphic novels and all that fun stuff. And today I've got a new guest who is new to this show and new to the main show as well, but we'll be having him on there soon, and that's Frankie Campisano. Frankie, how you doing today?
Doing pretty well, Perry. Thanks for having me. And hello, Patreon listeners. Hope everyone's having a good time listening.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for requesting to be on. Before we get started on the comic, I like new guests to kind of introduce themselves to the audience, let them know a little bit about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a writer and comedian. I am based here in LA, but I grew up on the East Coast. I'm originally from New Jersey, went to school in North Carolina, so been a bit all over. I work a day job in corporate recruiting in the entertainment industry, which is how I made the move out here to LA, and my long-term goals are to move into creative stuff and make that my full-time job. So like a lot of people out here, but we'll see.
So what kind of writing do you do then?
I do a little bit of everything. I do screenwriting, I do comic book writing, actually, short films, and I am also a poet by trade. I guess it's in school I studied screenwriting and poetry, so those have kind of been my two primary things. And if you do a little Googling on me, you can find that I have also published a novel as a high schooler. It was my take on, ironically enough, a Chris Nolan film. And I'm super embarrassed by it. It's not funny. It's not, it's very self-serious. It's not my current creative sensibilities. So I took it down, but I did it. So it's out there.
So you said you're doing comics and screenwriting and short films. Any stuff you've done that people might have been heard about or people should check out?
I have a pilot that I've been taking on the festival and contest circuit this year. It's called Drop Dead. It's a dark comedy. I have had 11 placements and counting, which is pretty good for my first time out. And it's kind of become a little bit of a calling card piece for me. It's not been shot yet. It's still just a script, but if folks are interested in reading, I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants to check it out.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. So, we talk about superheroes on this show. So what is kind of like your origin story, I guess we could say? What is your kind of history with superheroes and all that fun stuff?
Yeah, so I was absolutely raised on Batman and the DC universe, especially. I have been told, I don't remember this myself, but I've been told that as a kid I would watch the Adam West Batman series, and before I could even really talk, I called it No, 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 because that's the beginning of the theme song. And so whether it was the Adam West series and then the Michael Keaton movies and then Batman the Animated Series and then eventually Teen Titans and Justice League, like every, growing up, there's always a new version of specifically Batman in the DC universe that I always found myself coming back to. So it's been a lifelong passion. It was those series that then drove me into comics. And while I love stuff like Saga and, really, I keep up with the medium as a whole. I'm always coming back to Batman. That's kind of going to be my North Star when it comes to especially Western comics.
Okay, so that you just answered my next question, which is going to be, so you primarily a Batman guy, and I guess from that you kind of guess the answer to that is yes. And today you want to talk about The Long Halloween, one of the probably the most famous Batman stories by Jeph Loeb and sadly the late Tim Sale. He passed away recently. So before we jump too much into the comic itself, what was kind of your history with this comic book?
I find The Long Halloween to be the seminal Batman story. Year one is of course where a lot of folks start. It's one of the greatest stories in the medium. But when you think of kind of the prototypical Batman, it is Batman, it's Gordon, it's the Rogues Gallery, it is the grim and gritty noir, it's the lightheartedness at times, the levity. And then especially you think of the iconic art and all the different visions that you've seen. You know, like the Arkham games Batman is so different from the Adam West Batman, and that's different than the Brave and the Bold, or Tim Sale's Batman, of course, is just iconic. And so the Long Halloween just, you know, casts a long shadow as the Batman story. I think it is a fantastic entry point to the comics Batman. Ironically, I think DC kind of waffles back and forth about whether it's exactly canon, but for my money, in my head canon, this is, you know, it's the story. I got married earlier this year, Perry, and
Oh,
I gave my
congratulations.
I thank you. I had to think about, what do I give my groomsmen? I didn't want to give them, you know, I wanted to give them something that felt like me. I didn't want to give them like a stereotypical groomsman thing. And so, among a few other things, I gave everybody a paperback copy of The Long Halloween, because I was like, if there's one point I'm going to get all of my friends to really give it a shot and try to dive in and appreciate this thing that I think a lot of people have encountered in one form or another, but not always the genuine article. That was my opportunity. And a lot of them have really fallen in love with it.
You know, speaking as someone who has stood up in some weddings, I would have definitely appreciated that over some of the groomsmen's gifts I got. Yeah, like I like a lot of the stuff you said in there. I first read this probably when it was collected. I didn't read it in single issue forms. But this was probably around when the time this came out in a collection. That was probably around the time when I was starting to get into reading comics regularly. Like I dabbled in here and there, but I remember I was a big reader of Wizard magazine at the time, if anybody remembers that, and they talked this series up a lot in there. And the first time I read it, I'm like, oh wow, this is really good. And there's a lot of things I like about it. I like that you compared it to Year One, because I want to talk a little bit about the Frank Miller of it all, because you know everyone the almost stereotypical advice you get when you want to read a Batman comic is, oh, you got to read Year One, you got to read The Dark Knight Returns. And to be honest, and nothing against those comics. I think Year One is great. I think Dark Knight Returns is great, but I'm also find myself getting a little bit bored with the Frank Miller Batman. The Jeph Loeb, Tim Sale Batman is much more what I think of when I think of that character. He's he's dark, he's brooding, he's serious, but like you mentioned, there are moments of levity. He's not completely grim dark all the time. And I think that was one of the things I like about this series when you compare it to Year One is we get to see Bruce's thoughts. We get to see it. Bruce is the main character in this story. Year One, it's a Gordon story. Calling it Batman Year One is almost kind of a misnomer in that way. It's really just Gordon Year One. And I think, and when Miller does focus on Batman in that series, he's almost, almost cartoonishly serious in a way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, yeah, you're 100% right. Year One is a Gordon story, and this for the if you're going to go straight from Year One to Long Halloween, then for the first time you're really getting into Bruce's interior life, and you're seeing his attempts at kind of balancing Bruce Wayne, not just the mask, but Bruce Wayne the person, as he's kind of pursuing a romantic relationship. He's pursuing the never-ending mission in a way that he thinks, infamously thinks, oh, maybe it's within reach. And that's a thing that you just don't, it's hard to write a year 10, year 15, year 20 Batman who thinks, yeah, I actually might be able to pull this off. That's a Batman who has recognized and accepted there is no pulling it off. It's just a war.
One of the things I also really like about it is, and this makes an argument for something I think DC and Marvel to a lesser extent kind of forget, is that you can tell these kind of self-contained stories with these characters that aren't necessarily tied to any sort of specific continuity. Because like you were saying, DC kind of waffles about whether or not this is in continuity. And yeah, like all is it's in Batman's early days. It's obviously after Year One. But like if you were trying to say like in between what issue and what issue of Detective Comics or Batman does this take place, you can't really slot it in anywhere perfectly. But it's a pretty timeless story, and it gives us kind of these these versions of characters that aren't necessarily specific to any post-crisis, pre-crisis, New 52 or anything like that, but they're just like these kind of like timeless distillations of these characters. And that's one of the things I like about stories like this. And also they did Superman for All Seasons, and there's also Superman Kryptonite that Tim Sale did with Darwin Cook. And those types of stories, they're these self-contained stories that, again, they're not tied in any continuity, but they're so fun to get into, and you can hand them to anyone who is not an avid comics reader, and they won't feel lost or confused. And I feel like this is an argument for more stories of this type of format.
Absolutely. There's you can kind of track some early continuity going from year one to, if you want to include optionally, you can include the Matt Wagner Dark Moon Rising series, which kind of fits pretty snugly between year one and Long Halloween, but nothing really major happens. If you care about Hugo Strange, it's great. But from year one to Long Halloween to Dark Victory to Robin year one, Batgirl year one, a big time jump to Nightwing year one, and then you're kind of caught up with Post Crisis, and then the main books take over.
Yeah.
But I think there is that, like I said, there is that long gap there, and it's what you think of the classic Batman and Robin, the Rogues Gallery. That is such a fertile ground for DC to go back and tell more of these timeless stories, because some of this is stuff that is covered in the 40s, 50s, 60s that it's fun and there's an appreciation for it, but new readers are not going to seek that out necessarily, for better or worse.
Yeah, and even if they do want to seek it out, they might have trouble finding it too, because DC's not been so good with the trade collections lately, especially with 90s stuff. But that's another rant of mine. We can get into another time. But yeah, like you mentioned, there are those connections to year one, like Carmine Falcone, and he's got the scratches on his face which he got from Catwoman in year one. But you don't have to read year one to enjoy this story. I think that's what I love so much about it. Is it's both rewarding to seasoned Batman fans, but it's also rewarding to new readers. If this is the first Batman book you've ever picked up, you'll be completely fine. Like, you won't feel like, oh my God, I'm so lost, I don't know what's going on. Whereas you can't say that with a lot of the current comics. And as much as I love them, I mean, it's a little disheartening to know when I see these posts on, for example, like there are forums for DC and Marvel on Reddit, and like every once in a while, or fairly frequently, you'll get people coming in and posting like, I love the movies, I want to read comics, where do I start? And people are like, okay, well, here's a long list, and here's where and it's like, I can just imagine most of those people just being like, their eyes rolling into the back of their head and just being like, forget it, I can't do it.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that, unfortunately, shortly after the post-crisis stuff started, the Batman books especially started finding success with these massive crossovers that are amazing, but very inaccessible, both financially, for the amount of books that it would take, both narratively, the fact that they are these long sagas, significantly more than the 13 issues of Long Halloween,
right?
And you do feel lost when you're suddenly meeting characters that have a history and they're rewarding, but it's never been distilled the way that these very early era has been.
And you also mentioned earlier about Tim Sale's Batman, and when I think of Batman, there are a few artists that definitely spring to mind. There's obviously Frank Miller, early Frank Miller, not so much the later Dark Knight stuff, but Frank Miller is one of them. Neil Adams, of course, Bruce Timm, Tim Sale, and I would also put on the probably number 5 on like the top 5 Batman artists. Probably either the 5th spot I'd probably either give to Jim Lee or Greg Capullo are probably the 5.
I'd also throw in. The only other person I'd throw into that list is, at least off the immediate top of my head, is Kelly Jones. Kelly Jones Batman has got to be up there. There's clear like parallels there with Tim Sale's, where it's the caricature kind of style art, which I think lends itself to world building in a way that some of the more direct and kind of photorealistic art just doesn't feel very Batman.
Well, yeah, and I think in Tim Sale's art it's so iconic and so unique in that way, and it's got that timeless quality, because he does do he does some really like I'm doing some art training myself, so I'm paying more attention to this stuff now than I ever did before. But he makes some really interesting choices with when he chooses like to shade, when he chooses to just be flat, and it's never necessarily consistent, but it's suited for that scene. And I think he uses the art and the colors and the shading in a remarkably good storytelling way.
Absolutely. To paraphrase some internet comment that I read, I was trying to just read other takes on the series and see if I could find some fresh perspectives. This was a more critical take someone had, saying, kind of criticizing the core mystery and Jeph Loeb's storytelling. But they said it ultimately doesn't matter if parts of the story don't amount to anything, because Tim Sale's art is so good that every moment feels monumental. It feels like that, each frame is an iconic moment from the mythos. And not a lot of Batman stories can claim that as their, kind of claim to fame.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, like, there's one moment in here that I completely forgot about, and talking about stuff that's been referenced because, um, this has been cited as an influence in Batman Begins. It's been cited as an influence in The Dark Knight. It's been cited as an influence in The Batman. And looking at it again, and I didn't reread through the whole thing because I've read the story about like a dozen times. So I just kind of like skimmed it last night preparing for this. But one thing I completely forgot is the Warehouse of Money, which is,
Yeah.
and here it's Dent and Batman who set it on fire, douse it in gasoline and light it on fire. But in the Dark Knight, it was the Joker who did that. But it's very much kind of like the very similar type of idea that they're saying, right?
Yeah, I love that scene. And I think, the Joker version of it is iconic. It's a big movie
Mm-hmm.
moment. But just as cinematic, I think, is the moment in the original comics where it is Batman and Harvey Dent. And Harvey has that beat where he says, if we were two different men, this
Mm-hmm.
is untraceable cash. Batman says, but we're not. And that's an excellent distillation of who those characters are in those moments and in this period of time. And the first inkling that, these two colleagues, these friends, are starting to diverge in their philosophies, or maybe always have.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, and just talking to the iconic, that image of it being on fire. It's just it's again very simple artwork, but it conveys so much, and it's just so beautiful to look at, especially with that closing line, "Somewhere in the city, the Roman isn't laughing anymore." Like it's such a
Just
great line there.
it's fantastic.
Mm.
And there's just something about the art all throughout that really captures both the uniqueness of Tim Sale's line work and the funhouse mirror version of Gotham that we're
Mm-hmm.
seeing. But also the characters are familiar. There's still the iconography. It does bridge the gap between something completely stylistic like a Sam Keith Batman and the animated series, which I think is a lot of people, it's still even today is a lot of people's kind of default image of these characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, there's another great scene, like the Halloween murder scenes that cap off almost the end of every issue. Talk about iconic artwork. Like the one scene, I can't remember who this character is, but it's a black and white scene, and he's in the bathtub, and it's just like no dialogue, no captions, nothing. It's no sound effects. It's just the water's running, turns off, he steps in, he looks to the side, you see the gun, and then the only time we see color is just the blood in the bathtub, and that's it. And he's just laying in the bathtub like that.
Yeah, I love every one of those end cap holiday murders where the sound cuts out, the color cuts out, except for either the blood or occasionally the holiday themed
Mm-hmm.
kind of like tchotchke left behind. Those moments feel very cinematic, and I think it's comics reaching for something beyond just what's on the page, because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the sound drops out in a comic book. Like that's
Yeah.
amazing. It's inventive and fun and memorable.
And talking about the way that Sale, plays around with the characters, and how sometimes it's almost it's much more realistic, grounded style, but then sometimes he leans in the cartoony nature. Like I love his Joker because of that. Like his
Yes.
Joker is just so exaggerated and over the top, and it's so perfect for that character. And he's got like these rows of like piano key teeth. It's just amazing.
Yeah, he's almost got like a Bugs Bunny thing going on that's
Mhm.
so much fun and zany, and it's even again, we talked about how all of Tim Sale's art has this caricature nature, but it's telling that the freaks, the supervillains, are even more so exaggerated. They
Mm-hmm.
truly are a visual representation of what's happening in the story, where the world is changing and this new breed of criminal is coming in and pushing out the Godfather homages and all of
Mm-hmm.
that with the with the Roman and with the Moroni crime family.
It's funny because I think I read this before I actually saw The Godfather, and then when I saw The Godfather, I'm like, oh, I see where he got it from now. But I love that. It's such a perfect way to open it, right? Just like, I believe in Gotham City. Just that opening scene right out of The Godfather. It's so well done.
Yeah, I grew up in an Italian American family, and so The Godfather is like a seminal work of art for us. And then a generation removed, then it
Mhm.
becomes The Long Halloween, and it's this just two things that like I said, was kind of raised around,
Mhm.
merge into one perfect meeting of two different sensibilities.
And talking about the character design, another one is, I think Tim Sale has drawn the best version of Two-Face I've ever seen, because
Easily.
his version of Two-Face, and it always kind of seemed weird to me. I'm like, why would acid turn his hair white but melt his face? It doesn't really make any sense. And yeah, it's comic book science and all that, and I get that, but it makes sense the way he does it here. And I like that the way he does it is just so, it's such a really brilliant way of doing it. Like, he has the whole face is mangled from the acid. It looks like he actually did get hit by acid. And just the way he
Yes.
does the suit, where it's not, like a line down the center, but it's like he actually did sew two different suit jackets together.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's just such fun iconography with both Harvey Dent and Two-Face in this, and um kind of lost in this adaptation of the story is what's going on in the background with Harvey and his father, and
Mhm.
the abuse there, and the two motif. The story does in a lot of ways lean on your kind of existing knowledge of Two-Face and Harvey, and kind of what's happening there. It's really pushed to the background,
Mhm.
but it is still there. And fans of the character who want to keep stories like Eye of the Beholder in their headcanon can work those in a way that, this is still, to me, the iconic interpretation of Two-Face's origins. It is.
Mhm.
I think it was in an interview with Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale, where the interviewer, cheekily calls it Batman Year Two-Face, and like, yeah, it really is.
I mean, but yeah, that's just a good word. I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I never really cared much about Two-Face before I read this book. He was never a character that really, interested me too much. I mean, I'd seen him in the animated series and stuff, and obviously in Batman Forever, and I guess I just probably was just limited knowledge of the character, but I didn't really think of him as being all that important. But this book makes him seem like such a more integral part to Batman's rogues gallery. In some ways, like, you really feel the tragedy for this character through this book, and you really feel the kind of, because I remember the animated series, they did it the whole thing where Harvey and Bruce were friends. But
Yeah.
this one focuses more on the friendship between Bruce and Batman and Harvey, and it's a very interesting relationship, because it's not, especially in other media, it's something that's like almost never touched on, the fact that Batman having friends, right? I mean, we see him with, we get the, obviously Alfred, but that's always been a father son dynamic. We see him with Gordon in the Dark Knight trilogy, and then in the Batman. But again, it's not like the same, it's much more of a working relationship, right? Here it he Loeb really makes you feel the friendship between these two characters.
Very much so. The uneasy alliance between Gordon, Harvey, and Batman is at the core of this story. It's the If you're looking for, the connections to the Dark Knight, it's that relationship
Mhm.
carried through, more so than the specifics of this case, or um, the mystery here. Um, and that choice to make Harvey not only not friends with Bruce in this version, but antagonistic towards Bruce. He doesn't
Mhm.
think anything of this, of this billionaire. That's such a fun contrast, because you do have the Harvey and Batman friendship that is very briefly established in year one. So then when it's brought back, you can tell that there's all this history of them working together. And when we talk about the animated adaptation, they make some choices there too that bring Harvey even closer to the Batman Gordon kind of run at the mob and run at the rogues as they're starting to emerge. That is not really present here.
Yeah.
Harvey's DA work is mainly restricted to taking down the mob.
Yeah, we'll talk about the animated version, because I have I definitely have some thoughts about some of the choices they made in that.
Likewise.
But yeah, you mentioned the Dark Knight, and one of the best scenes in that is that rooftop meeting between them. But it's handled so differently there compared to here. Whereas, they're all kind of like antagonistic towards each other in that scene, which makes sense for what they're doing in the movie. But I like it so much better here, where there's this respect that they each have for what the other can bring to the table. And just that, when that great scene where Gordon says, look, I'll allow you to bend the rules, but you can't break them. And they're just kind of like, and Harvey and Bruce and Batman are just kind of like, like Harvey's like, okay. And he just kind of looks off the screen, and then Batman just says nothing. And it's just, but then how that scene is mirrored at the end, right? Even to like the low angle shot, where before it was Gordon, Harvey, and Batman. Now it's Gordon, Two-Face, and Batman.
Yeah, that broken relationship and the fractured partnership, and even then that Two-Face comes in and hands them a major clue to not necessarily solving the case, because Batman and Gordon don't really solve the holiday murders.
Yeah.
But he gives them a big hint of context, and not to get into the ending too much yet, but there's a lot of different interpretations there about which characters know what, and what is supposed to be taken as characters' assumptions of what's happening versus the kind of reality of the story. And it's very telling that even at the end, Two-Face still kind of throws them a bone. Maybe that's narrative contrivance of Batman and Gordon need to now they need to move along and start working on this other part of the, what does he mean there are two killers? But he provides that information apropos of nothing. So for my read, like, he's doing his friends a solid, fulfilling that promise that they made at the beginning of the story.
Well, I mean, you'll probably agree with me on this next part, but one of the things that always annoys the crap out of me about Batman Forever, among the many, many things that annoy me about that movie, is the scene when they're in Wayne Manor, and Two-Face keeps flipping the coin, and when it keeps coming up on heads, he gets angry and he just keeps on flipping it over and over again until he gets the result he wants. I'm like, that's not Two-Face. He flips it, and whatever the coin says, that's what he accepts. And that scene, I think it also kind of it does a great job of reflecting that duality of the character, where he is still Harvey. Part of him is still Harvey, and that is reflected in that moment.
Absolutely. And specifically the coin, I think, is the thing that gets really lost in a lot of adaptations. It becomes like the father's lucky coin. It becomes, in some versions, it's just a normal two-faced coin. But what I really like in The Long Halloween, and not too much attention is really drawn to it, it's just kind of like a blink and you'll miss a detail, that it is the two-faced coin, but one side has been scratched out, just like Harvey, and it is because he's into that kind of duality. There is a fair choice that he's going to go with, whichever side it lands
on. One of the things too I like about this is what they did with Catwoman, because I've always been kind of annoyed by the year one interpretation of Catwoman, because it feels like it's the laziest Frank Miller trope of every woman is a prostitute. And this one, it's got a Selina who, yeah, you could put that in her background maybe, but it's not so explicitly part of her character here. But she's someone who's, kind of through her thieving, she's kind of bought her way into high society. And I kind of like that take on Selina a lot more.
Me too. Definitely one of the larger criticisms that you could have of The Long Halloween, and really carries over to Dark Victory and Hush as well, is that a lot of the women are really defined by their relationships with the men in the story, whether that is Selina defined by her relationship with Bruce, her relationship with Batman, her relationship with her father, the Roman, whether that is Sophia, again, defined by her relationship with her father, whether that is Poison Ivy as literally just kind of there as the temptress, and then she's kind of out of the story.
Mhm.
But, you know, taking that for what it is, which is a comic that a white man in the 90s wrote, and it's a Batman book, all that aside, Selina does get a lot of really excellent character development and a lot of agency, despite the fact that
Mhm.
her story is kind of defined by her relationships with these men. She's driving those relationships.
Oh yeah.
She is the one that is pushing Batman to be like, hey, you know, are we in a will they won't they kind of thing. You get that they have a history there, both as Bruce and Selina and as Batman and Catwoman, and there's um almost like a fun mirror of the Gordon relationship, where it's like whether these characters fully know the dual identities going on or not,
Mhm.
they're playing along,
Yeah.
and that's fun. And then one of the things I really love is that you can tell that Jeph Loeb planned all along for the familial reveal there with Selina's history, and the reason that she's as embedded into the heart of the story, and it's there from page one. It
Right.
doesn't feel like a tacked on detail. It feels uh, that is truly kind of a rewarding mystery, even if you can, you know, surmise it pretty quickly.
No, yeah, that's one of the most. I think that's one of the best things that's done in this story is the fact that connection to the Roman, and also I'm just talking about the villains too. You know, one of the things I always found interesting in this is that you see the Penguin just in that scene at the end, but he never has any lines. He never says any. He never has any role in the story. He just pops in right there at the end. There, it's like, what? Why aren't you doing anything with this guy?
It's a huge missed opportunity because, like, so we talked at the beginning a little bit about headcanon, and so I have a pretty sizable DC library Batman primarily, and one of the things that is really missing is a modern take on that first Penguin encounter,
Hmm.
something to put him into context. And it's especially sorely missing in the Long Halloween because he is the rogue that truly perfectly straddles that line of mobster and freak.
Yeah,
And it's absolutely a missed opportunity not to spend a little bit of time with him in this story. And interestingly, also in Dark Victory, you have Mr. Freeze just kind of just popping up. He's there now,
hmm,
and again, not that these stories needed to take time out to offer up origins for other characters, but just giving that context for, you know, is this the 50th time that Batman's dealt with the Penguin? Is this the first time that Penguin is kind of being lumped in with these other rogues? Did he have relationships with uh, the Falcone family or
hmm.
the Maroni family going into this? He's just there.
Yeah.
And he's one of the original rogues. He's one of the ones that makes sense to be there before you get your Riddlers and Jokers and Two-Face.
Yeah. I mean, the Gotham TV series, I've again, lots of criticisms I have about that, but I did think that the Penguin story was handled really well in that, and where I think they did a good job of showing how he straddles this line between mob connections and the freaks, and how the rise of the freaks kind of gives him an opportunity to kind of bridge that gap between the two. Um Also, to a lesser extent, I mean, you can kind of see the seeds of that being planted in the Batman as well. And I don't know, I could be wrong because I'm not as well versed in Penguin comics, and you could probably correct me if that's been told in any sort of decent way in the comics.
Not necessarily. No, there's been a couple times where Penguin has had like mini series focused on him that fill in some of the gaps of that rise, and there's like references to, and then Batman was a thing, but
Hmm.
it's not ever, you know, that first encounter story has never really been told through a modern lens, and that journey of what Oswald would have been going through up until this pivotal kind of turning point, this crossing the Rubicon in the Long Halloween. Like that, honestly, if there were ever to be another reason to revisit this time period, Penguin's perspective would be very fun.
Oh yeah.
Uh, it might be treading too closely to the actual themes of this book, but there's an easy direct parallel there to draw.
Well, I mean, one of the things that always stuck out to me in Batman Returns, that line Max Schreck says to Bruce when they're talking about Cobblepot, the Penguin, and Schreck says, if his parents hadn't 86'd him, you two might have been bunkies in prep school. And that's a line that always sticks out to me because I'm like, that's such an easy connection to make, and it's almost it's almost never been done except for in the Telltale games, as far as I
Yeah.
know. And which, some criticisms are valid about the way they handled stuff there, but I thought that was probably the most interesting thing. The fact that, Oswald and Bruce knew each other and had this connection going back to childhood. Um, and it's something I think, and it's something that makes so much more sense than, Bruce and Harvey having a relationship or any other character. And it's something that's just never really kind of addressed.
Yeah, it's very interesting that both Harvey and Oswald have at different points been like the 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 high school or college or earlier
Mhm.
era friend of Bruce, and then there's the parallels as he becomes Batman and they become Two-Face or the Penguin. And there, I don't think there's ever been a story that tries for all three, but I'd almost be interested in that too. It's one
Oh
of those things
yeah.
that, like, sure, it might suspend, it might strain suspension of disbelief, but like, it's Batman. It's
Mm.
par for the course.
Well, I mean, I think some of those would make a lot more sense than some of the stories we have gotten that stretches it. So, I mean,
Yeah.
those three, it does make, and it's such a nice contrast to where those characters end up, because you have Bruce, who becomes like you have these three. Well, I mean, Harvey's not really a kid of privilege, but you can do something with that too, where he's there because of scholarships or whatever, or public grants, or Wayne funding, or something like that, and where you have that, and you see where they all go. Like Bruce ends up, going his path and becoming the hero. Penguin becomes a straight up villain, and then you've got Harvey, who's walked both paths. I mean, that's a story I kind of want to tell now.
Yeah, it's right there for the taking. And I think that, um, at least in what I consider to be the foundational elements of Batman as a character, which are present in the Long Halloween.
Mhm.
It is this, his drive is that his father was the doctor. He really genuinely thinks I can do good and I'm helping people and I would never turn anyone away. And then his fatal flaw has to be the idea that he thinks that his villains can be redeemed even at the 11th hour.
Mhm.
He even by the end of the story, there's a part of him that thinks, that Harvey's turn to the dark side could be reversed, that he could be saved and brought into the fold. And I think that's such a fun just element of the character. It keeps him from being too much of like the Bat God. It keeps him from being the prep time master, because it is it is a flaw that will just continually put him at odds with other characters, and he can never truly reconcile with the damage that these villains cause.
Well, also it takes him away too from the more fascistic interpretations by, like, in
Yeah.
Dark Knight Returns and all that, where he's just, you know Dirty Harry in a cape and cowl, basically. And I like this version more, where he believes in the idea of redemption. He has a hopeful side to him. I mean,
To a fault.
yeah, and that's one of the things that I think gets lost, and I think the animated series captured this brilliantly, which is why I think it is like the perfect version of Batman we've ever seen. Weird Barbara Gordon fetish aside, we get in Batman Beyond, but this idea that he's someone who, yeah, he's dark, yeah, he can be scary, but one of my all-time favorite scenes from the animated shows is the Justice League episode when Ace is dying and Amanda Waller sends Batman in to take care of her. And, with the implication being that he'll kill her. Instead, he just goes and he sits with her and talks with her. And it's like and I like that they finally recognize that in the movies, in the Batman, when he has that moment when he realizes, I don't just want to be about vengeance. I want to be about hope.
Exactly. Yeah, I really appreciated that in the movie, and it was a thing that that they didn't lead with in the marketing, and I think caught a lot of people, more casual fans, by surprise,
Mhm.
that was, a character flaw in the movie that he had to recognize and overcome and turn away from. But again, based on the stuff that I was just talking about, like, to me, like, that is it. That's the character,
Mhm.
and it lends itself to a more nuanced interpretation for that to be a lesson that he kind of learns and recognizes after not necessarily having gone too far and beaten someone to death, but having created a reputation and a legend around himself that was having too good of an effect at
Mhm.
being scary and otherworldly and hellish and brutal. Um, because then he can pull back and becomes a little bit more of the, Neil Adams adventurer Batman, but still having the effect of people don't know what he's capable of. They don't. A Batman who goes around announcing the fact that he has these rules and boundaries and limits is a Batman who is deafening his effect of, having these criminals think that he absolutely could and would kill them.
Yeah, and I mean another one of my favorite moments of Batman from animation was in Young Justice when he's talking about the reason why he recruited Robin, and he says, Robin had to hunt down his parents' killer, and then Wonder Woman's like, why? So he could be like you, and Batman's like, no, so he wouldn't be like me. And again, that's the hopeful side of the character, whereas compared to the Frank Miller version, it's like he's training child soldiers.
Yeah, it's the idea that Bruce sees in Dick Grayson himself. He sees a child in a lot of versions, age 8, same age, who has lost his parents to what Bruce, I think in a lot of versions, recognizes as a murder and not just a tragic accident. And he takes him in, and he's able to, like, to me, that is a different interpretation of Bruce's intended goal as Batman, to prevent any other kid from going through what he went through. And like, yes, Dick loses his parents, but he doesn't go through what Bruce went through because he has Bruce there as this older brother father figure. And I really am optimistic that Matt Reeves is going to try to tell that story on the big screen. And I think that there's at least in the Dark Victory version of those stories, while it feels of a part with Long Halloween, it's Bruce's arc through that really kind of tracks, where you believe, like, okay, he is at a point in his life where he would take in this child, and he would he would do this without real consequences be damned, it's the right thing to do. Whether it makes his overall mission harder, whether it makes it easier to connect the dots and go, oh, hey, maybe the billionaire and his ward are the crime fighter and his sidekick. And then it also, especially in last year's Long Halloween special, which Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale came back to do another story, a one-off set after Dark Victory. It's now presumably their final collaboration that will be published. I don't think they had anything else that they worked on before Tim Sale's death. But it works amazingly as a coda to their era of Batman, because you have the return to a friendship between Bruce as Batman and Gordon, because Gordon sees in Bruce a young, struggling father, and says, like, let's have this moment together on a Halloween as Dick and Babs are going out trick-or-treating as as Robin and Batgirl.
I haven't read that. I didn't even realize they'd come out with that. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, that one of the things I want to talk about too is, and you kind of touched on this earlier, is the whole mystery aspect of it. Because the more that I read this story, the more I realize that as a straight up mystery, it doesn't quite work so well. Like, really, very much like Hush, although I think Long Halloween did a better job of it, is that this is a story to basically be Batman's greatest hits. It's basically there to showcase him, his rogues gallery, the core characters in his universe. That's really what it's there for. The mystery is just kind of like window dressing to hang all that on.
Very much so. There's the original version of the story had Calendar Man as the actual big bad. It's a little bit of a weird choice they were trying to make, where Calendar Man, the kind of like goofy gimmick villain, is there, but they're also referring to the Holiday Killer as Calendar Man, and then the reveal that actually it's the same guy. Like, it was a little even more convoluted than what we ended up with, and so the editor at the time told Jeph Loeb, make it somebody new, and so then it becomes the Holiday Killer, and it Calendar Man gets moved into this ultimately superfluous but just really fun Hannibal Lecter role, in a way that when at least one of the Holiday Killers is arrested and Alberto Falcone is in Arkham, and he's directly across from Calendar Man, and they're going back and forth naming holidays in kind of like a tit for tat, like petty spat.
Mhm.
It's fun because it comes shortly after Alberto's claims to his father that he has aligned himself with the freaks and not the mob, and that he's bigger than all of them.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, no, but you're not a rogue. You're going to be treated as like a Calendar Man level kind of like also ran.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The Calendar Man part in this is so interesting because I didn't, when I read this, I had no idea that he was actually a villain from the comics. But and so this was my first exposure to him. So when I did see him in the comics, in some of his earlier stuff with like the goofy costume and the cape made of dates and everything, it just looked so bizarre. Whereas this version is just haunting, and like the whole Hannibal Lecter type of thing is such a great way to use him.
And it's fun that the characters, at least, Batman. I don't know how much Gordon really talks about the Calendar Man, but Batman doesn't take Calendar Man seriously at all. And
Mhm.
why should he? But it's emblematic of how the freaks are not being given the kind of gravitas that they think they deserve, and then ultimately demand as the story comes to its conclusion.
Mhm.
And having Calendar Man there to just kind of to comment on the core mystery is pretty fun, because early on he has references to whether Holiday is a man or a woman, or who could it be, and it's implied that he's just kind of taunting them. But by the time you get to the end of the story, and both you have Alberto having taken the fall and taken credit for all of the murders, although it's pretty clear that there's a handful that he has to have done, because there
Mhm.
would be no reason for anyone else to be trying to cover up his tracks with faking his death. Um, but ultimately, you also have Harvey doing a few of the killings, but if I think the only one that he's guaranteed to have done is the Roman at the end.
Yeah.
And then you have the big reveal at the end that turns the whole story kind of on its head, with Gilda having revealed to have done the very first murder, the Johnny
Mhm.
Vitti murder in June, the Thanksgiving murder, and which I think is when they kill like the 5 mob guys at once,
Right. Yeah.
unless that's
Yeah.
the Christmas one. And then she also takes credit for the Christmas one. And then you hear only from Gilda that she believes that it was Harvey
Mhm.
as well, and that it was this thing between the two of them. And the whole story has been really pushing the idea. Multiple characters say Harvey Dent is Holiday the whole way through, and that kind of parallels his journey into Two-Face, and then ultimately killing the Roman as what he says, like, the long
Mhm.
Halloween is over. But if you go through it with the interpretation that Gilda is wrong, that the only confirmed kill, the one that we see on panel, is the only one that Harvey did,
Mhm.
that it was Gilda and then Alberto. There's still some parts that don't super work. Like she just
Yeah.
happens to, she takes a break when he steps in. Like it, and the animated adaptation makes some bold choices to try to smooth that over, in ways that I ultimately don't hate, but is not at all present in the original
So
text. So
that's those are ways that I absolutely do hate. So we'll be talking about that more next week. But um,
I think it works for an adaptation, and
mhm.
we'll get into it for
Yeah.
sure. But I think it wouldn't have necessarily worked in this version, because it would have made a lot of these detectives who are already, you're kind of side eyeing, and in their
Mhm.
inability to work this case, it would have made them even more incompetent.
Yeah.
Um, but I really like the idea that, you know you have Gilda operating on the assumption that Harvey is the other killer, and
Mhm.
he is not. And
Mhm.
so moments like when she catches him in the basement saying, "Hey, why do you have a gun exactly like the serial killer is using?" And he's like, "It's evidence. I always bring evidence home." And you have to interpret that moment either as an unspoken thing happening between the Dents, where they're both acknowledging that they're both complicit in these killings,
Mhm.
which is a very generous read, I think, of
Mhm.
that scene. Or Harvey really hasn't done any of it yet. He's truly just genuinely single-mindedly obsessive in taking down the mob, and is starting to think, oh, maybe something's up here. And then his desire to kind of protect Gilda and hide that truth from Jim and from Batman is his reason then for, similar to Alberto did, Harvey says, oh, it was me. I was doing all of these. I think that kind of like domino effect of different characters stepping up and taking credit for more of the murders than they were actually responsible for is really fun. And similarly plays into the way that the story has a few different people. You know, there's one point where someone says, like, I think it could be Catwoman and here's why, and you kind of see a version of it. And it's also black and white and the sound drops out just like the real murders. Those kinds of assumptions not necessarily ever being exposed and the characters kind of taking the information at face value really works for me, in the sense that, like, Gordon and Batman, I think, have a sense that they didn't solve the case, but they have that conversation at the end where Gordon really tries to reassure Batman that the good guys won. You know, at what cost, who's to say, they'll see. But they only win insofar as, like, a lot of people die, ultimately including the murderers.
Right.
But it's a real Pyrrhic victory, which is fun for Batman at this stage.
Yeah, but I think the thing with the thing about blah, 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 sorry, trying to get my thoughts together. It's 8:30 in the morning here almost, so I'm a little bit discombobulated. The mystery part of it always kind of sticks with me, because if you're just looking at this as a regular story, I feel like Loeb wanted that kind of twist ending at the end, and I think it comes off as a bit forced for me.
Yes.
I mean, I get what he's doing. I get what he's trying to go for. I can get why Gilda would be motivated to do it this way. But the key thing about a good mystery is the audience has to have all the pieces there to put it together themselves. And I don't think they've done that in this. And
Definitely
that,
not.
yeah, so that's one of the biggest things that sticks with me, is that as a mystery, I don't think it works, because even if you're, and you know, mystery readers, some of them go in trying to solve the case right from the start. Some of them just read along for the fun of it, but they should have the ability to solve it based on the information that's given to them in the text. And it's not there. It's just, and there are too many coincidences. Like, she decides to stop, and then unprompted, Alberto decides he's going to step in and take over. And it's like, either Alberto was just, you know, incredibly coincidentally lucky that Gilda wasn't still doing holiday killings, or he knew something about it, or what. They're like, that part of it is just not explained. Same idea with, like, Harvey being involved in it too. You have to, and it'd be one thing if you had worked that into the story, like, wait a second, why there's suddenly 2 victims of the holiday killings? I think that would have been an interesting angle, because now it's like, okay, well, you have the holiday killer, and then you got this copycat killer, and that would have been an interesting angle to explore too.
Yeah, I think the read that I was giving before is genuinely doing work that's not in the text. You know, it's trying to help Jeph Loeb's story along, because he leans into that twist ending at the end where they introduce Gilda as, you know, behind it all along. And she then monologues to no one the explanation for everything that's happened in the story so far, in a way that, you know, it really doesn't hold up to too much scrutiny. I'll say I prefer the Long Halloween's kind of like nothing burger ending over Hush's, like, really kind of just mind-numbingly, like, of course it was the OC best friend who we've never heard of before and who is suddenly introduced. And it's the kind of thing where I just wish that especially the Batman books occasionally had this almost showrunner mentality of editors being willing to step in. And we had this for Denny O'Neil's era, certainly. But in the post Denny O'Neil era, we see less of it, where, to talk about Hush a little bit more, like, if we'd met Tommy Elliott and then a couple years later we get the Hush story, wow, that's fun. It feels like payoff. It doesn't feel like, you know, we're seeing the table dressing and then, you know, then the reveal. And something that the Long Halloween has to its credit is that, other than kind of fleshing out the crime families a little bit more, we're kind of playing in the sandbox of existing Batman characters and the versions of them that we're familiar with. And Like we talked about before with even Two-Face's whole gimmick, Batman says, "Oh, he's obsessed with the number 2," in response to Two-Face saying that there were 2 holiday killers, but nothing in this story would suggest that,
Mm-hmm.
other than the fact that his name is Two-Face. You have to just know that
Yeah,
element of
yeah.
it, which works for the reader, but doesn't work for Batman in that moment, making that statement with conviction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Hush because it always annoys me when people talk about Hush as being one of the greatest Batman stories because that as a story it just doesn't really work, and it's just it is that especially more than any other story. It's just we're here to see Batman fight his rogues gallery drawn by Jim Lee. That's the entire purpose of that story. It has no other purpose. And they made some good choices. There's some really good things that are happening there. Like I thought the Jason Todd reveal was a really neat twist. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm on board with this as being like but then it's like, oh no, that was just Clayface impersonating Jason Todd. And then it was and then you get the Tommy Elliott, like, wait a minute, come on. The guy, like you said, the guy you just introduced now as Bruce's long lost best friend is going to turn out to be the killer. Come on. I mean, it felt, I think, and I'm not sure, I haven't seen any interviews, so I'm just speaking completely out of turn here, but my gut feeling is that maybe Loeb originally did want to have that Jason Todd reveal, and then editorial stepped in. It's like, no, we can't do that.
I would really enjoy the story more that way, because I think it's okay to introduce a character like Tommy Elliott and then kill him off just to be like, okay, now this is why Bruce is really invested in this murder, this at this point in his career, in the way that like the Long Halloween doesn't need. It's not a ultimately it's not a end of the world style stakes that he's dealt with in his later career, so it works. But by Hush, he's done a lot, he's seen a lot. There needs to be higher stakes for that core mystery. And yeah, you're right that moment with Clayface as Jason Todd is so good. Perhaps even more so because for whatever reason, Loeb and Sale just had no interest in Clayface in Long Halloween and Dark Victory, even though he was around. Multiple Clayfaces were around. They had a lot of different options they could have used, and he just was not a rogue that they were interested in for whatever reason. And so then to use it as kind of one of the pivotal turns of Hush, that really works because it feels like, okay, it's not just, oh, Poison Ivy has turned someone evil. We've seen that. We saw that with Bruce in Long Halloween. We see it with Superman and Hush. It's not, Batman going too far and about to kill someone, and Gordon steps in and says like, no, you can't, which we see with Alberto Falcone, and then we see in Hush with the Joker. It doesn't feel like a remixed moment, It feels like it makes a case for Jeph Loeb telling more Batman stories. And I'll take Tim Sale's art over Jim Lee's art. That's personal preference. But it's Hush is still a gorgeous story. But I do think there's a reason that it's not really considered of a piece with the Loeb Sale stories.
Oh yeah,
because it is different.
It is, yeah. It's like I said, it's the greatest hits. That's what it is. But it's and though I think they had a nice thing with the Riddler thing at the end, it's just when you have the Tommy Elliott part of it, that just it detracts from that, which is what I think, which is why I kind of, and I know probably people are gonna turn this off when I say this, but I actually like the way that the Hush animated movie handled it much better because of that. Because they completely leaned into that Riddler side of it. I thought, okay, this is what I wanted the Hush comic book to do.
We're gonna have to really get into it when we talk about the animated adaptations, because I think the changes in Long Halloween animated version worked more for me than the changes in Hush, mainly because it just felt like that felt like a version of the story where it was truly like, okay, well, what are we doing with Tommy Elliott as a character? And I'd be very curious and this is, I think the animated movies are such a good opportunity for this more broadly to serve as the definitive retellings of these stories when they're done correctly. Like I think Under the Red Hood is the definitive version of that story versus the comics version, because there's no Bloodhaven being nuked happening all of a sudden at the end of the story and massively distracting from what is a story about Bruce and Jason and the Joker. And the Hush animated adaptation, I think it becomes a Riddler story in a way that I understand why, but feels kind of divorced from the narrative in ways that I missed. And I'd love to see the version where it is a Jason Todd story and a Riddler story, because then it starts to I don't know. I feel like there's a version of that that like locks into focus really clearly, just in kind of seeing like, okay, well, what would be in the Loeb sale tradition, but now with Jim Lee doing the art, what would be this era of Batman's kind of definitive story? And that Jason Todd return, the Riddler being more formidable than Bruce had known, and the dual identity reveals of Bruce telling Selina, "Hey, I'm Bruce Wayne," and then the Riddler saying, like, "I've known for a long time," and with then the element of someone else who would have known in Jason, kind of mirroring like Harvey's turn. It really would lock into place in my mind as of a piece with these earlier stories too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like, I mean, I liked what they did in the Hush movie, but it would not be my definitive version of that. What you just said would probably be my definitive version of Hush. And that if I was rewriting Hush, that would probably be what I do. And also what they do, I do love that moment at the end of Hush, though, when Bruce tells Riddler, like, I know I have nothing to fear from you, because, what good is a riddle if everybody knows the answer to it? And then the Riddler just says, like, he's thinking, like, he pauses, like, fuck, he's right.
Yeah, I really like, one of the things that I can appreciate about having these modern Batman comics, even, far beyond Hush, coming up into even like, what's happening in the present day comics. The idea that he has all of this history, and over time the knowledge of that dual identity secret has spread, and more characters have had to consequently come into the fold, and it becomes a lot easier for people on the outside to connect the dots, and you have moments like in some of the recent arcs where the Joker has finally come around to say, like, yeah, I didn't care for a long time, and now I know, and I care, but my beef is still with Batman and not Bruce Wayne.
That was one of the things. Yeah, I love that scene in Snyder's run where he goes there to confront about the secret, and it's just like he realizes the Joker doesn't, even if the Joker knows, he doesn't care.
Yeah, and that's a moment that I kind of felt like was handled not quite as well as it could have been in Tynian's run, where now the Joker does care, and it's kind of like using that knowledge against Bruce, because it didn't feel like it necessarily was the culmination of anything.
Right.
It didn't feel like, it wasn't given this kind of like seminal moment that it needed to be. The Joker suddenly cared because this is the story where he suddenly cares, not because of anything that drove him to that point.
Yeah. Well, I think I'd be fine if they put the Joker on the shelf for like at least 5 years and just like try something different for a little bit. And the movies too, I'd be fine with that as well. And I'm not speaking of those moments. I can't remember which story it was. It was either the end of Officer Down or the end of the No Man's Land stuff, when Batman goes to Gordon and they're having this argument, and Gordon's like criticizing him for leaving and everything, and Batman's about to take off his mask, and Gordon tells him no, and he's like, first off, what makes you think I haven't already figured it out?
Yeah.
And I love sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, in my head canon, like, Gordon clocks it at the end of year one, when Bruce jumps out and saves, I think he's as Bruce Wayne when he saves baby James, right? He might be Batman, I don't know offhand. He might be in the full suit, but I'm pretty sure he saves him. I don't want to get it wrong. Either way, either Bruce or Batman leaps out and saves the baby, and I think that is the moment that really solidifies for Jim Gordon, like, okay, I get it, but I'm gonna not.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give myself that plausible deniability. And I love that the beat is that Jim is like, I not only do I not care, like, it's a discredit to me as a detective to think that 10, 15, 20 years in, that it's not like really, really obvious. And that's another I think there are like certain elements of realism that seep into the Batman world that I really like. Another one being in John Ridley's The Other History of the DC Universe, the idea that there absolutely could have been times where where Batman has brutalized a criminal to the point that like they later succumb to those injuries and die.
Mhm.
But it's in the best interest of the Gotham police to not publicize that and keep this idea of at that stage in his history when he's like a public figure, that he is this mass vigilante who doesn't kill,
Mhm.
even if he is unintentionally, just as a result of the practicality of what he does every night.
Mhm. Yeah. That I've never heard about that. I'll have to look that up. But yeah, my headcanon is I've got headcanon for 3 specific characters. It's Commissioner Gordon, Perry White, and Robbie Robertson. All 3 of them know the identity, but they don't talk about it. And I think and there have been hints like this here and there. I think one of the best moments in Spider-Man 2 was when when Peter's talking to Jameson and Robbie's sitting there. He's like, I heard Spider-Man was there, and there's just this close up of him like giving Peter this side eye. And and in the Dark Knight Rises, I got kind of annoyed with the reveal to Gordon at the end, because earlier on he's hinting that he knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman, right? When Blake comes on, do you ever wonder who he is? And he's like, oh, I know exactly who he was. He was the Batman. And it's just kind of like this kind of idea is like, I know, but I'm not going to say anything about it because I can't acknowledge that I know. But then at the end, when he has this moment of surprise when he realizes it's Bruce Wayne, I hated that moment because of that.
Yeah, and I even think like in the Morrison run when uh, Bruce Wayne just kind of like publicly leans into, oh, I'm Batman's rich friend, and I am funding all of this stuff, and I am I am his means. That to me is even, I love that it is like towing the line of the reveal even more, and that there is the idea that there are going to be people that go, yeah, I know what that means, and there are going to be people that be like, oh yeah, of course they're pals. That's totally normal. And I think it is it's fun to have characters like Gordon just know, but it doesn't matter, and it doesn't do any good to talk about it. Like it does.
Right.
There's no nuance in Gordon just being like, yeah, it's Bruce Wayne. That's not interesting. The Gordon who knows but plays along like he doesn't, that's interesting.
There's also kind of that with Lucius Fox in Batman Begins, where he's like, look, you don't want to tell me what you're using this stuff for. That's your business, but don't treat me like I'm an idiot.
Yeah, it's like, oh man, am I making bat suits to give to you that you then give to Batman? I don't think so.
Yeah. But yeah, I like it when they reward the character. They let you realize how intelligent these characters are, instead of undermining it that way. One other thing about Dark Victory, and there are 2 other things. First, I thought Solomon Grundy was kind of an interesting choice to put in this book, because as far as I know, he's not traditionally got any real Batman connection. Am I wrong about that before this story?
He doesn't. He, I think, is originally an Alan Scott rogue,
Right?
like way back, and then Alan Scott is kind of grandfathered into Gotham as one of Gotham's first heroes.
Right.
So the idea here is that Grundy is a character that Bruce would have heard about growing up as like this zombie that lives in the sewers of Gotham. And that's, again, super understated. It's not in the text. But that's kind of the rationale to include him. And not to speak for Tim Sale or Jeph Loeb, I think there's something to be said for like how much their Grundy looks like Grey Hulk from their Marvel Colors series. I think maybe there was a discussion of, I've read interviews with both Jeph and Tim where they talk about Jeph was the DC guy and Tim was really more of a Marvel guy, and so
that's interesting.
The appeal for him here was reinventing these Batman rogues through the lens of them being freaks and playing with the iconography, but stretching them out and skewing them. And I wouldn't be surprised if the inclusion of Grundy came down to like, just who do you want to draw? And there was a character that was already pretty clearly at his wheelhouse, but it lends itself to some of the more emotional downbeats. Grundy as a lens to characterize both Gotham the city, Bruce / Batman the character, and then Harvey and Two-Face as a character is really fun. And it's an element that I think I consider it one of the major through lines of the story, and it has never made it into any adaptations.
Well, one of the things I was wondering, tell me what you think about this. What would you think if they had used like Croc in that role? If Would you think they would have had like they would have been able to work some of those same ideas in if it was Killer Croc instead of Grundy?
Yes, and, you know, for going back to my own headcanons, like Killer Croc is another great example, and you see this in a lot of different stories, but of Bruce recognizing the humanity in his villains. He
Mhm.
doesn't see them as these irredeemable monsters or forces of nature. He sees them as human beings who have been shaped by trauma and grief into what they are,
Mhm.
because he is shaped by trauma and grief into what he is. Um, and he recognizes the duality in himself. That different interior life is probably true of the villains that he's, you know, beating up.
Mhm.
And so Croc in that Grundy role, you know, assuming they would lean into the, you know, Wayland's humanity, you have moments for an early career Batman to directly kind of interrogate that idea of these characters don't have to be villains because
Mhm.
society has declared them to be, that there is a path forward. Not all of them certainly have like could complete the full redemption that Bruce would think,
Right.
but the fact that he's always going to try, and that it's like a standing offer to all of these people that he comes into contact with. um and you just have, again, one more iconic rogue that for one reason or another they just, it's conspicuous, Croc's absence, the same way Clayface's
Mhm.
is.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and one of the thing I want to mention about the rogues here is, I think the issue when they've got all the rogues appearing to Falcone, it's a nice scene up until Batman shows up, because I feel like they underplay how dangerous all these rogues are, because he takes them all down in like 2 pages.
Yeah, it's. I think it is that scene. I love the shot of all of them in the office. I think that is as iconic as Batman, Two Face, and Gordon on the
Yeah.
rooftop. It's as iconic to me as like some of the other kills. It is the shot that I think of when I think of the Long Halloween,
Hmm.
and it's, I think, restricted by the formalism that comes in of the shift to black and white from Batman's
Hmm.
smoke bomb to echo the holiday murders and the violence that comes in. But I ultimately think like they're not really saying anything with Batman beating up the Rogues Gallery. It's a level of like hyper competency
Hmm.
that I don't think that this version of Batman has yet. Um,
And then he never
and to
shows
do
unless there are all these villains in one place.
Yeah, all of a sudden, you know, he struggles with any one of them individually, but get
Mhm.
them all together and it's like they take themselves down. I don't know.
The inverse ninja law at
It's
work.
Yeah, and it would have been nice to see like in an extended sequence like just how well he knows each of these rogues.
Mhm.
That would have been a good moment to really get in his head and kind of get how he feels about them. Like is he disappointed to see the Penguin suddenly turning up and working with the
Mhm.
freaks? Is he surprised that the Joker is playing nice with other characters? Like it, and some of that's in there, but it's kind of really swept under the rug for the spectacle of, hey, the rogues have gathered.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention is the lettering. I'm a letterer by trade. And one of the things, so I really noticed good lettering, and I think they've done some really good, cool things with lettering here. Whether it's the difference between when Harvey's speaking versus when Two Face is speaking, sometimes in the same panel, and you can almost hear the vocal shift.
Yeah.
But also like the way like the Mad Hatter's dialogue is rendered in this kind of like, mixed case, bizarre font type style. They do a really good job with the lettering work in this.
It's phenomenal. There's something to be said for comics as a really collaborative medium where a
Mhm.
bunch of different artists in ways both understated and sometimes really in your face are all coming together and putting their sensibilities and their kind of authorial stamp to make one work of art. It is a lot like film in that way.
Mhm.
Um, and this, I think, is a group of folks who are at the peak of their powers. Um, the criticism that we've discussed with the core story and
Mhm.
with Jeph Loeb's writing at large aside, like it's still, you know, again, it's still a story that I just really have a lot of love and affection for, and that comes down to every piece of the assembly.
Oh yeah.
Um, there's an interview in the back of the deluxe edition where Tim Sale was talking about whether or not he was going to be able to do his own inking or if they needed to bring someone in because they were doing this monthly.
Mhm.
Um, as you know, I believe the first Batman maxi series at the time, it was, you know, it was a big deal to have a Batman #1 of 13
Mm-hmm.
on the stands, and because they were holiday themed and almost playing out in real time as the issues were coming out, there was a lot of pressure on the creative team to keep it moving and
Right.
get things ready and make their ship dates. And um, Jeph Loeb, on I believe like the second issue, was late getting his script to Tim Sale by like 2 weeks, and
Oh,
that's a long time
yeah,
for an artist.
absolutely. Yeah.
And so, and this was the November issue, and so the big Christmas one was coming right around the corner. On top of the fact that like it also was literally Thanksgiving and Christmas, and people have things going on in their lives
Mm-hmm.
beyond writing and drawing comics. So Tim Sale was really under the gun and had to kind of push through. But that was the moment where he was thinking like, who might we bring in to ink it? And there were people that he asked who he thought would elevate his work, who turned him down. And so he said, I'm going to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the opportunity for someone to come in and help us meet this deadline is kind of passing us by. It's got to get done.
Right.
And he talks about how it just made him a better artist, kind of keeping up with that schedule and doing the inking and everything himself. And it really is stands the test of time.
Well, I think because we talked about the story problems here, and I think it's telling that compared to something like Hush, you really don't notice the story problems in Long Halloween unless you're in this kind of format where like we're specifically looking for things to critique here. But like as you had said earlier, hinted at earlier, it's so well done, and they're all at the top of their game. They're all bringing like their A game here, and so when you stop to think about it, it's one of those things where it's like, wait a minute, some things don't quite connect here. Just kind of like, and that happens sometimes in a lot of good stories. Like I love, Captain America Civil War, but when you think about the timeline of how some of those things work, like, wait, he's Iron Man's got 48 hours to bring in Captain America and the Falcon, and yet he's got time to go to Queens and recruit Spider-Man, and Cap needs to have Hawkeye and Scarlet Witch and Ant-Man come meet him in Germany, presumably by flying, but yet that they have to steal a Quinjet. So it's like how are these things connecting? But you don't realize that in the moment because you're just so entertained by what's happening. And it's the same thing with the story problems in this. Yeah, the holiday killer stuff, they don't really connect well, and there's some massive coincidences that have to happen for the story to play out the way that Loeb is telling us it plays out. But again, the mystery is just kind of like it, in a way, it's kind of like the MacGuffin. It's just the reason for there to be a story. But really, we're reading this story to see Jeph Loeb reinterpret the Batman and his classic villains.
Absolutely. And I think it's almost a masterstroke that Batman and Gordon don't really fully solve the case.
Mm-hmm.
They know they don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. They don't have the definitive answers. So as a reader, you kind of let it slide that the definitive answers that are given to us, or at least strongly suggested, they're not fully satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
It plays to the story's advantage that, we're hearing from a monologue from Gilda what she thinks was happening, so that if for the story to function, like that needs to be not word of God true, then okay, that's the character's unreliable interpretation and assumptions that have played out over the course of the story. So yeah, even though it leaves you wanting more when you've read it the 20th time, when you read it for the first time, it's a love letter to these characters and this franchise and this specific time in the character's history. I really appreciate as a Batman fan who, like I said, really grew up with this character, to read stories in the modern day where, the writers have said that the current kind of present day canon is supposed to be about halfway between the Batman and Robin kind of golden age era and the Batman Beyond neo-noir cyberpunk stuff. So that means it's a character who's been doing it for 20, 25 years in universe. And there are stories where you get to see, is Bruce Wayne out of touch? Does he not know what's going on in his city anymore? Is the effects of an endless war that he knows is never going to work weighing on him, despite the fact that he's literally saved the multiverse.
Mhm.
You know, that's a lot to kind of juggle in one character, and it works, but there's something so pure about that first turn
Mhm.
from the mob driven noir to the supervillain comic booky
Mhm.
stuff, where it's just the dipping the toes in the water, um, in a way that lets even the least heightened characters like a Mad Hatter feel on par with a Joker.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, very well said. And you know, I think a good mystery, it surprises you at the end, but it also has a moment of like, "Oh, duh, why didn't I see that coming?" And this so I don't think this is a good mystery, but it is a great Batman story. I think that's probably the best way I could really kind of summarize it. Not a good mystery, but a really good Batman story.
Absolutely, and I think that similarly there are parallels between the way that Batman is like not a great detective, but
Mm.
working on it in the Long Halloween, and the way that he is, his desire to be a detective is to his detriment almost
Mhm.
in the Batman, where he's more interested in the puzzle box and the mystery and the cat and mouse game than he is in just like taking out the threat.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, I think that's everything I had to say about Long Halloween comic. How about you? Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
Just highly recommend it. Like if you listen to us talk about it for an hour and 20 and spoil the story and you've not read it, go out and read it. It's so much fun. You can, if you're looking to get into Batman comics for the first time, the very easy route to catch up with the big hits would be to go Year One, Long Halloween, Dark Victory,
Mhm.
Robin Year One, and then if you want Batgirl Year One, Nightwing Year One. But otherwise, you could do Hush and Under the Hood and then kind of just jump right in with the modern stuff if you
Mhm.
want. There's a lot to love if you like the character, if you're willing to be patient with the different quirks of any given decade of comics.
Mhm.
um, it's not all going to be as good as the Long Halloween, but you know there is just so much that you could dig your teeth into, and uh, if you're like me, it'll open the door to even more, the broader DC universe, comics in general. Like it's, if you're listening to this, you probably love comics already.
Mhm.
You probably have read The Long Halloween. So then, if that's the case, share it with somebody else. Open the door to someone. Open the door for someone else to love these characters too.
Well, yeah, I think this is such a great comic book too, because when people talk about introducing people to comic books, like they'll always say you read Watchmen or you read The Dark Knight Returns. And I'm like, those are books you read after you've read like 50 other books because you'll have be able to better appreciate them. But if you're looking to introduce someone to comic books, to superhero comic books especially, I think it's hard to go wrong with The Long Halloween because it's self-contained. There's nothing, everybody knows the basic Batman story, right? We've seen it in like 50 different movies now, so it's everybody knows that basic story. So this is a very good way to let them see what is it like, what is a Batman comic book like, and what is the comic book format like. This is a really good way to introduce people to that. And then you could then go on to introduce them. Oh well, if you like Long Halloween, maybe you want to check out Year One, or if you like, maybe you want to check out Superman Kryptonite or whatever, right? It's a lot easier to use this as kind of like the gateway drug into comics than something like Watchmen, which is just so dense and so hard to appreciate unless you've already got a background of sorts in comics literacy.
Absolutely. I think The Dark Knight Returns is, it's of course a seminal work of Batman. You can see its influence on a million different
Mhm.
pieces, just like The Long Halloween. But for my money, that's not my Batman.
Yeah.
That's a different interpretation of the character that really only works as a contrast to, what the character is supposed to be and represents.
Mhm.
And so I think folks starting there, that is how you find fans who are then only, really interested in like the Zack Snyder interpretation,
Right.
and
Yeah.
not nothing else. And certainly, I'm not gonna to yuck anyone's yum. If that's your version of the character, cool. I don't think that should be someone's introduction to the character.
Mhm.
And if you're coming to the comics from the Dark Knight or the Batman, and you're like, I want to see more of that, or I want to see that story in comic book form, it's the Long Halloween, and
Yeah.
it's still going to show you new things that you haven't seen in
in those adaptations. And even if you've seen the animated version, which we're going to talk about, and you come to the comic from that, you're still going to see new things that you haven't seen in it's like, that's what I love about the story, is it can be told so many different times and in different ways, and still the original has something fresh to show anyone who thinks they're already familiar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Frankie, you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yeah, so I am at Frankie the Fourth on Twitter. That's the number 4th. I am at Classic American Cool on Instagram, and my portfolio of writing, stand-up, comics, all kinds of different multimedia stuff that I do, other podcast appearances, can all be found at frankiecampisano.com.
Okay, great. Well, Frankie, thanks so much for coming on. And if you guys enjoyed this chat, so we're far ahead on the main show. So you're going to have to wait. We're doing the recording next week, but you're all going to have to wait a few months before you actually get to listen to it. But we will be talking eventually. You'll be able to hear it, us talking about the Long Halloween, but the animated version, that is. And it sounds like we'll have some fun stuff to say about that when we get to that. So, but that does it for this episode of the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. Thank you so much, subscribers, for being a subscriber. And if you like this, please let me know. If you want us to cover anything, drop me a line either through email, superherocinephiles@gmail.com, or leave a comment on the Patreon page. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about, and I'll see if I can work that in somehow. And also, tell other people about us. If you got any friends who would be interested in hearing about this, let them know. Subscribe for just as little as $1 a month. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.